Hi, welcome to another Quick Flicks brought to you by Summit Racing Equipment. My name is Norm. Today we're going to look at carburetors, particularly Holley carburetors. And what we have to say today could apply and will apply to other manufacturers as well. So if you have a Summit carburetor, a Demon, or an Edelbrock, you might want to stay and take a look. We're going to look particularly at the fuel inlet system of a traditional Holley 4-barrel. So let's get started. All right, so let's talk about Holley carburetors. Traditional Holley 4-barrel performance carburetors. It could be 4150, 4160 for what we're talking about today. What makes Holleys so crazy to tune and so powerful are the very same things. Holleys could have 5, 6, 7, 8 circuits or systems all in the one carburetor, or more even. The more exotic ones, I don't even know how many circuits some of them have. Some of the shops and the guys that build those, they won't tell you. But you could have a inlet circuit, an idle circuit, an accelerator pump circuit, a main circuit, a secondary circuit, a choke circuit, the power circuit. Lots of circuits, lots of systems going on in this one 4-barrel, okay? So let's talk about the fuel inlet circuit today. And now, if you'll imagine along with me, okay? So the fuel is coming in my dual feed bowls, okay? Dual feed, dual inlet type carburetor here, traditional Holley stuff. And on this particular carburetor, we're going to take it from the fuel entry all the way to the point to where the fuel gets ready to leave the bowl today. Okay, that will be the fuel inlet system. So we're going to talk about fuel level, we're going to talk about floats, we're going to talk about needle and seat, perhaps hinges, and maybe even some bowl details and tricks here in the process, okay? So let's consider the fuel level portion of what's going on in the bowls and how we're going to take care of that and get that adjusted correctly. So like I said, my dual inlet, dual feed carb has fuel coming in. Hopefully I'm in the 5, 6, maybe 7 PSI range. Not much more than that. Now, if you're racing, you might go a little deeper on the pressure, maybe 8 or 9. That's really pushing it on a Holley carburetor. For a conventional performance or street person, street application, I would suggest 5, 6, maybe 7 tops. Okay, so pressure first. And thinking about that, the fuel's coming in our bowls. Let's take a look and see what goes on here with our bowls. Okay, now I did a few things ahead of time. I magically took the tension off my accelerator pump lever and my accelerator pump diaphragm down below so that I could take that off without worrying about ripping or tearing my diaphragm on my accelerator pump housing or inside the housing. Also, I loosened and removed most of my bowl screws. So I've got one left here. And let's take a look at what goes on inside this particular bowl. Okay, so just give it a little nudge. There we go. All right, so now if you're with me, remember the fuel's coming in the bowl. All right, it comes into the bowl, and there is a well, if you will, or a little box cast into the housing here where the fuel comes over, just in front of the hinge for our float. And right there is where our needle and seat reside. So there is this area where the needle and seat and the hinge reside and the fuel is coming in. Now, I want my fuel basically to just wet the threads on my little inspection hole here, okay, for my fuel level. So if imagine along with me now, my fuel pressure is delivering the fuel. My needle and seat are adjusted so the float rides to a certain height that only allows the bottom threads to be wet or moistened, okay? Now, racers will sometimes raise this toward the middle, but you're going to have to do that with a sight glass style of bowl, okay? For conventional, with the screw-in plugs, you can only wet the threads, okay? I mean, if you think about it, you're going to be rolling fuel out of there if you don't, okay? So with a conventional plug, please keep the fuel at the bottom of the threads to where it just barely wets the threads. It might seep out or creep out and wet the side of the bowl for you. That's a good level for this type of bowl, okay? Now, once we've got that adjusted, oh, hey, let me show you how that's done, okay, while we're here. Well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen my needle and seat assembly, and I'm going to just gently put a little pressure up here on my float, okay? We're going to talk about floats here in just a second, but I want you to hopefully see this. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and lower my needle and seat assembly back into the housing, back into the bowl, and I'm turning ever so slowly and gently clockwise. And I'm going to turn to where I just feel a little pressure start to push down on the hinge of my float. And I think I'm right there now. Now, hopefully you can see the float start to drop as I continue to adjust the needle and seat here. So let's see here. Okay, there we go. There should be some movement. It does actually adjust, okay? So I'm going to go back roughly to where I was. And now let's talk about floats. Okay, so in this particular application, I've got a nitrofill float, and it is notched. Okay, the reason it's notched is to clear the jet extensions. Now, this is something that not every Holley would have, but it is something you might want to consider. They really work well. It's not an expensive or difficult swap or transition, okay? What jet extensions do, and here I'm getting away from floats for a moment, but I'm going to come right back. But what jet extensions do are they move the jets out away from the wall of the primary metering block. By doing that, you push the jets farther out into the bowl. Okay, so they're sticking deeper into the bowl instead of being right up against the edge of the bowl. And what that does is that helps keep them covered in fuel as the bowl does, you know, different left and right movements, and the fuel moves with it, or maybe it does the linear thing from a whole shot and the fuel moves back and forth. This helps keep the jets covered with fuel. Very important, okay? Keeps you from starvation, keeps all your circuits pulling fuel over, which is what you want in your Holley. Okay, so let's go back and consider some float stuff. All right, so as I said, clearanced floats for the jet extensions. This particular one here, black, that's a nitrofill. There's also a brass float. Brass floats are what you want to use if you're going with an exotic fuel or an alcohol type application. These floats here, the nitrofill and the brass, they are center hung. Center hung floats are your performance floats. Nothing against a side hung float, mind you, okay? But a side hinged or side hung float is going to react sometimes unfavorably to fuel movement in the bowl. And reason being, if you think about it, if it's hung on the side of the bowl, it's reacting to every nuance going back and forth as the fuel level sloshes back and forth in the bowl. Okay, so they tend to be very reactive or overreactive. Let's talk about a needle and seat assembly for just a moment. Okay, so as you saw, as I moved as the float level transitioned off of my needle and seat adjustment, needle and seats, all right? There are, hopefully you can see this, this has a square slot instead of a hole. Now there are needles and seats that have holes. Needles and seats with holes are designed primarily for fuel economy. Yes, you can make a Holley 4-barrel an economical mile per gallon type carburetor if that's your desire, okay? For performance, though, you want this square, or I think they call it a cathedral type opening, okay, in your needle and seat assembly. They make two sizes with the square opening, and I think one is an 097, the other is a 110. Depending on your cubic inches, your horsepower, your application, you may find that an 097 is more than adequate. If not, and your fuel delivery demands more fuel through the needle and seat, more fuel to feed the bowl, then a 110 is going to be your size, okay? So needle and seat. Let's see here. We've covered jet extensions, bowls, the bowl thing, floats. Let's talk about the hinge for just a moment, okay? Now I tore this one down a little bit and took out this brass float. Now it is suspended with a dampened or spring-loaded hinge. Okay, now this type of spring actually rides on the axle of the hinge. There are other versions where the spring or the dampening device is underneath the float and it sits on the base or the bottom of the bowl. But I would encourage you to consider some type of spring-loaded or dampened float. And the reason being is you're not having your float react or overreact to every slight nuance. What you really are after are just to have that float react to the rise and drop of the fuel, not to every, not to every jolt or bump in the road or slight movement in G's that causes the fuel to transition in the bowl. Let's see here. So from there, gosh, I'm trying to think what I've forgotten. We've got our fuel level, we've got our jet extensions, our bowls. Let's see here. Okay, so if you're, there is a Holley device, and I think some other carburetor people make them, that is called a whistle, okay? And it's a bowl baffle. And what it does, if you think about this, as my bowl is on my carburetor, okay, it's pretty much sealed to atmosphere or atmospheric pressure, with the exception of the transition tube over into the main body. Okay, now there's a couple wells, there's a couple circuits that run off of that, but you want to keep the fuel from sloshing over under acceleration or deceleration or left or right G's like that. And this little whistle is basically just a little plastic piece, but it comes in, let's see, you can see it on this ball or this metering block pretty well. It's this area right here, this rectangle in the metering block, and what you do is you stake it, you drill the metering block and you pin it in position, and it keeps fuel from pulling over simply from vibration or G forces and just having that fuel slosh in there. So it keeps it from pulling over into the main or off of the main, into the main body, sorry. And I'll put my primary bowl back on, and remember also, when I took the bowl off, I relaxed the tension on my accelerator pump lever through the spring and the adjustment nut here. And no magic, I made the adjustment, and I want to check this now to be sure I have it done correctly and haven't over tightened it. So I have a feeler gauge set for 15 thousandths, Holley's recommendation. And also, you want to do this with the motor off because I'm going to go to wide open throttle. Okay, so I pull the throttle all the way back, and I'm just going to take my 15 thou and slide it between the underside of the hex head nut and my lever. Okay, now as you can see, it slides in. It's definitely tight, but it is in there. And I'm just going to go with my 15 and walk away. Now I'm going to relax the throttle. I want to tell you that I did a crisscross pattern on my bowl bolts, and Holley I think suggests like 30 to 40 inch-pounds, and I went to 38, and I did it progressively. I started with 20, I went to 30, and then I buttoned them up with 38, and I double checked them. Okay, and be sure you crisscross on the bolts. Okay, crisscross pattern. And while we're here, as I mount my carburetor on my intake manifold, again I do the crisscross thing. Holley always says to start with the passenger, or normally the passenger rear, and then go to the driver front, across, and then crisscross to the back on the driver. And here you're looking into that 60 to 80 inch-pounds. Remember, inch-pounds, not the big one, get the small one out, okay? All right. Hey, thanks for joining us today as we took a look at the fuel inlet circuit on the Holley Performance 4-barrels. Next time around, we're going to look at the idle circuit, and we're going to look at some tips and tech stuff on that and help you get your idle circuit set up correctly for your Holley Performance 4-barrel. We're also going to put the inlet circuit back together, and I'm going to give you some a few closing tech tidbits along with some torque specs and clearances, very important clearances when we put the bowl back on with the accelerator pump circuit. So be sure to join us then. And if you like what you saw today, or if you'd like to post a comment, leave a response, do that right here down below. Also, if you'd like to subscribe, you can do that over here. And if you want to scope out some more videos or quick flicks, they're off to the side right here. So again, my name's Norm. Thank you for your time.